The paddle moves through darkness and the darkness clings. Her hands guide the 6-foot wooden shaft in slow, mechanical circles, left, forward, right, back, stirring the boiling molasses in the great copper vat. The motion has become automatic, inscribed into muscle memory through 18 hours of repetition. But as she watches her own fingers wrapped around the heat-blackened wood, blistered and weeping, they seem to belong to someone else, some other girl, some ghost already rendered down into the sweetness that permeates every surface, every breath, every pore of skin in the Langridge Refinery. The vat is 8 feet across and 4 feet deep. Set into a brick furnace that radiates heat like the mouth of perdition, the molasses bubbles and hisses, sending up thick plumes of steam that catch the lamplight and transform it into something viscous, something that coats the lungs and makes every breath taste of burning sugar. The surface of the liquid is the color of midnight, so dark it absorbs light rather than reflecting it. When bubbles rise and burst, they release not just steam but whispers, or what sounds like whispers. What might be whispers if whispers could be made of heat and sweetness and the rendered essence of suffering? She no longer knows her own name. It was taken from her 6 months ago, or perhaps she simply forgot it. Let it slip away like water through fingers because holding on to it required an energy she no longer possessed. Master Cornelius Langridge calls her girl or you there or sometimes nothing at all, just a sharp whistle like summoning a dog. The other workers don't use names either. Names are dangerous things. Names suggest personhood, and personhood is not permitted within these brick walls. The refinery breathes around her. The great copper vats, there are 6 of them in this boiling room alone, seem to expand and contract with their own rhythm, independent of the fires that burn beneath them. The brick walls sweat moisture that runs down in rivulets, leaving trails through the accumulated grime that look disturbingly like fingers, like hands reaching down from the ceiling. The shadows cast by the furnace flames writhe and twist, suggesting shapes that shouldn't exist, limbs that number more than 4, mouths that open wider than anatomy should allow. She stirs. Left, forward, right, back. The molasses resists the paddle, thick and heavy, pulling at her shoulders, her back, her arms that stopped aching hours ago and now simply exist in a state beyond pain, beyond sensation, in some gray realm where the body continues its function even as the mind drifts free. Time has lost meaning here. There are no windows in the boiling room, no way to mark the passage of hours except by the gradual thickening of the molasses, the way it darkens from amber to deep brown, to this final, absolute black. She knows it's night because the other workers have been dismissed, sent back to their quarters that shed behind the main building where they sleep on dirt floors and fight the rats for space. But she remains. Master Langridge decided she needed to finish this batch herself, alone as punishment for some infraction she can no longer remember. Or perhaps there was no infraction. Perhaps he simply wanted to watch her suffer for his entertainment. The paddle catches on something at the bottom of the vat. A chunk of unmelted sugar, perhaps, or a fragment of the previous batch that refused to render. She pulls harder and the resistance suddenly gives way. The paddle surfaces trailing strands of molasses like dark silk, like spider's web, like the threads that stitch the world together. For a moment in the lamplight, those strands seem to form letters, seem to spell words in some language she almost remembers. You're doing it wrong. The voice comes from directly behind her, so close she can feel breath on the back of her neck. She doesn't startle. Something inside her broke weeks ago, maybe months, and with it went the capacity for surprise, for fear, for any of the small animal responses that might have kept her alive in a different place, a different life. Master Cornelius Langridge circles around to her left, his boots leaving sticky prints on the molasses-slicked floor. He's a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome before alcohol and cruelty carved it into something harder, something mean. His shirt is open at the collar despite the heat, or perhaps because of it, and his skin glistens with sweat that catches the firelight. He reeks of whiskey, cheap corn whiskey, the kind that eats holes in a man's stomach, and tobacco and something else, something rotten beneath the sweetness, like fruit gone bad in the summer sun. He takes the pipe from between his teeth, examines the bowl with exaggerated care, tamps down the tobacco with his thumb. The pipe is cherry wood, expensive, carved with some design she's never looked at closely enough to identify. Not that it matters. The pipe is just another tool for inflicting pain. The paddle needs to reach the bottom, he says, his voice carrying that particular tone of false instruction. of pretending to teach when what he really wants is an excuse to punish. You're not stirring deep enough. The molasses burns on the bottom if you don't stir it properly. She knows this. She's been working this vat for 6 months every day, sometimes twice a day, and she knows the exact depth and angle and pressure required to keep the molasses from burning. The burned molasses of last week, that was Master Langridge's fault, not hers. He'd added too much raw cane too quickly, overwhelming the fire's capacity to maintain proper temperature. But facts don't matter here. Facts are just another luxury stripped away at the refinery door. Yes, master, she says, and her voice sounds strange to her own ears, distant and flat, as if it's traveling from very far away to reach her mouth. He watches her resume stirring, his eyes tracking the motion of the paddle with an intensity that has nothing to do with quality control. He's looking for something, weakness, defiance, fear, anything that will give him permission to do what he's already planning to do. She's learned this over 6 months of observation. The way a naturalist might study a predator, Master Langridge doesn't need reasons, but he likes to have them, likes to dress his cruelty in the costume of discipline. She keeps her face blank, her eyes fixed on the bubbling surface of the molasses. Don't give him anything. Don't flinch. Don't cry. Don't show him the places where you still feel pain, because he'll find them and press them and tear them open. But he's already reaching for her. His hand closes around her left wrist, pulling her arm away from the paddle. She doesn't resist. Resistance costs energy, and she has none to spare. The paddle continues its slow circle, caught in the momentum of her stirring, moving through the molasses like a ghost of motion. Master Langridge turns her arm over, examining the underside of her forearm where the skin is slightly less burned, slightly more vulnerable. The pipe is still in his right hand, and she can see the red glow of the tobacco in the bowl, and can feel the heat of it inches from her flesh. You need to be reminded of your place, he says conversationally, as if discussing the weather, as if her arm isn't trembling in his grip, not from fear, but from exhaustion, from 18 hours of stirring without rest, from months of accumulated damage that her body no longer knows how to process. You've been getting ideas. I can see it in your eyes. She has no ideas. Her mind is as blank as the dark surface of the molasses, as empty as the space where her name used to be. But this doesn't matter either. He presses the pipe bowl against the soft skin of her inner forearm. The pain is extraordinary, immediate. A white-hot lance that travels up her arm and explodes in her shoulder, her neck, her jaw. The smell of burning flesh mingles with the burning sugar, and for a moment they're indistinguishable. All of it just fuel for the refinery's endless hunger. Her vision darkens at the edges, contracts to a single point of light that might be the lamp or might be something else, some doorway to the place where all the lost things go. She doesn't scream. She stopped screaming 2 months ago, after Master Langridge made it clear that screaming only made things worse, only prolonged the punishment, only fed whatever beast lived inside him that required suffering for sustenance. But she doesn't not feel it either. That's the horror of this place. The pain is absolute, inescapable, branded into nerve and memory. What's broken inside her isn't the capacity to feel, but the capacity to believe that feeling matters, that her pain signifies anything beyond another moment endured in an infinite sequence of moments to be endured. He holds the pipe against her skin for a count of 5. She counts because counting is something to do, a way to mark time, to prove that time still exists even here, even now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then he pulls the pipe away, releases her wrist, steps back to admire his work. The burn is roughly circular, the size of a penny, already blistering into a wet, weeping wound that will take weeks to heal and will leave a scar that matches the dozen others that mark her arms, her shoulders, her back, a constellation of cruelty, a map of survival. She returns her hands to the paddle. Left forward, right back. The motion grounds her, pulls her back from wherever she went while the pipe was burning, while her body was just meat experiencing the chemical process of combustion. Master Langridge watches her for another long moment, and she can feel his disappointment. He wanted a reaction, tears, pleading, some acknowledgement of his power. But she's given him nothing, and in the economy of cruelty, nothing is an insult. You'll learn, he says finally, replacing the pipe between his teeth. Tomorrow I'll teach you proper respect. Tonight you finish this batch alone. Don't leave until it's done, you hear me? Yes, master. He lingers a moment longer, perhaps hoping she'll break now after he's left her alone with the pronouncement of future punishment. But she just stirs and the molasses bubbles, and the shadows on the walls continue their impossible dance. His boots echo on the brick floor as he walks away, out of the boiling room, through the storage area, toward the refinery's main entrance. She hears the heavy door slam, hears the bolt slide home from the outside, locking her in, though there's nowhere for her to go even if the door stood open. Silence settles over the refinery, broken only by the hiss and pop of the furnaces, the steady bubble of the molasses, the distant groan of the building's timber frame as it cools fractionally in the night air. The heat remains oppressive, suffocating, turning each breath into a labor that rivals the stirring. She works alone for another hour, maybe 2. Time is elastic here, stretching and compressing without pattern. The molasses thickens to the proper consistency. She can tell by the way it resists the paddle, by the sound it makes when bubbles burst, by instincts she's developed that have nothing to do with instruction, and everything to do with survival. When something becomes a matter of life and death, the body learns quickly. Finally, the batch is complete. She banks the fires beneath the vat, reducing them to coals that will keep the molasses warm but not boiling, ready for morning when it will be ladled into barrels for shipping. Master Langridge will check her work tomorrow and find no fault with it, though this won't spare her the promised lesson. Nothing will spare her that. She should sleep. There's a corner of the storage room where she sometimes curls up when Master Langridge forces her to work through the night. But sleep feels impossible, dangerous even, as if closing her eyes might mean never opening them again, might mean slipping into that darkness and finding it preferable to waking. Instead, she walks among the vats. There are 6 in the boiling room, each at a different stage of production. The smallest, closest to the door, contains raw molasses freshly pressed from the cane, still amber-colored and sweet. The largest, the one she's just been stirring, contains the final product, rendered down to its essential darkness. The others occupy various points between these poles, a spectrum of sweetness and suffering. She trails her burned hand along the copper rim of the second largest vat. The metal is hot enough to hurt, but she's so far beyond hurt that she barely registers it. The copper has developed a patina over months of use, a discoloration that should be purely chemical but looks disturbingly organic, like bruising, like rot. In certain light it resembles handprints. The molasses in this vat is still bubbling, though the fire beneath it is low. The bubbles rise slowly, thick and viscous, and when they burst, they release that whisper sound, that susurrus that might be steam or might be something else. She leans closer, and for a moment, just a moment, she swears she hears words, "Sister." The molasses whispers, "Sister, we remember." She jerks back, her heart suddenly pounding, that animal response not quite as dead as she'd thought. But when she listens again, there's nothing, just the normal sounds of the refinery, fire and steam and the settling of brick and timber. She moves to the third vat. This one isn't currently in use, cooled and cleaned, waiting for tomorrow's batch. But the copper still bears stains that no amount of scrubbing can remove. Dark patches that spread like continents on a map, like the shadows of countries that exist only in nightmares. In the lamplight, she can see her reflection in the curved surface of the copper, distorted, stretched, barely recognizable as human. Her face is hollow, her eyes sunk deep into her skull, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut. She looks like something already dead, a revenant going through the motions of life. When did she become this? 6 months ago she was different. She had a name, Mercy, that was it, Mercy Blackwood. Her mother had given her that name, hoping it would protect her, hoping the word itself might summon some quality of divine intervention. It hadn't. God's mercy, like all other mercies, stopped at the refinery door. She had a mother once, a small brother. They were sold away before she was brought here, scattered to different plantations, different states. She'll never see them again. She understands this with the clarity of absolute certainty. The world that contains her mother and brother is as distant as the world that contained her name, as unreachable as the surface of the moon. The refinery took everything. It stripped her of name and family and hope and replaced them with heat and sweetness and the knowledge that pain could exist beyond what she'd imagined possible, that the human body could endure more than death before finally permitting itself that release. She had replaced another girl. This she knows because Solomon Pritchard, the old man who works the crushers, had told her during her first week. The previous girl's name was Ruth Chambers, and she'd lasted 8 months before she disappeared into the machinery. Solomon hadn't elaborated, and she hadn't asked. Some questions have answers that make survival harder. But she thinks about Ruth Chambers now, standing in the empty refinery, surrounded by bubbling vats. She wonders if Ruth's death was quick, caught in the gears, crushed, rendered, or slow like everything else here. She wonders if Ruth chose it, found some way to slip into the machinery deliberately, to end things on her own terms. She wonders how long until her own replacement arrives. The Molasses whispers again, from multiple vats this time. A chorus of soft susurrus that shouldn't be possible, that defies physics and sanity but exists nonetheless because the refinery operates according to rules that have nothing to do with the rational world. Sister, they whisper. Sister, 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 we remember your name, Mercy. She closes her eyes. But that only makes it worse because now she can see them. Ruth Chambers and all the others. The dozens or hundreds who died here, who were broken here, who were rendered down into product and sold north to sweeten the coffee of merchants who would never know they were drinking someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's beloved. The shadows on the walls are moving again. And this time she's certain it's not just the lamplight and her exhausted mind. They're reaching for her, beckoning, inviting her to step closer to the vats, to lean over the edge, to slip and fall and finally find rest in the sweetness. It would be easy. The edge of the vat is right there. The molasses is hot enough to kill quickly. 3 seconds of pain, maybe 5, and then nothing. Release. Her hand touches the copper rim. The metal burns her palm, but she doesn't pull away. She leans forward just slightly, just enough to feel the heat rising from the surface, to smell the concentrated sweetness that's like flowers and rot and burning meat all at once. The molasses bubbles, and a face appears on the surface, distorted, impossible, but unmistakably a face. Ruth Chambers? Her mother? Her own face? She can't tell. It's smiling or its mouth is open in a scream or both somehow simultaneously. Sister, it says, not yet. Soon, but not yet. There's work to be done. She pulls back, gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. The face is gone. The molasses is just molasses again, dark and viscous and chemical, nothing more. But she heard it. She knows she heard it. The refinery groans around her, timber contracting, bricks settling, copper expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Or perhaps it's breathing. Perhaps the building itself is alive, animated by all the suffering it's witnessed, all the deaths it's devoured. Perhaps the molasses really does remember, really does whisper, really is waiting for something. She stands in the lamplight, surrounded by vats, her burned arm throbbing, her body so exhausted it's vibrating with fatigue. Tomorrow Master Langridge will teach her his lesson. Tomorrow she'll endure whatever he has planned. Tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, stretching into an infinite sequence of tomorrows that will eventually end with her disappearing into the machinery. Just like Ruth Chambers, unless the thought arrives unbidden, unwelcome, dangerous. Unless. She looks at the vats again, 6 of them, copper and fire and darkness. She thinks about boiling points in the physics of heat. She thinks about how molasses at full temperature, 240 degrees Fahrenheit, can strip flesh from bone in seconds. She thinks about how easy it would be to fill a ladle, to carry it to. No, that thought leads nowhere good. That thought leads to a death more horrible than drowning in the vats. To torture that would make Master Langridge's pipe seem like a kindness. But the thought persists, taking root in her mind like a seed in fertile soil. Unless. She extinguishes the lamp, plunging the refinery into darkness broken only by the red glow of the furnace coals. The vats continue their whispered chorus, a lullaby of suffering, a promise of something. Mercy Blackwood. Because that is her name, she suddenly remembers, she claims it. She takes it back from the sweetness that tried to swallow it, walks to the corner of the storage room. She curls up on the floor, the burn on her arm screaming protest, and closes her eyes. In her dreams, the molasses sings. It knows her name. It knows all their names, every girl, every woman, every person who died here, whose essence was rendered down and sold away. And it's hungry for one more name before it's satisfied. One very specific name. If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe for more macabre tales. Leave a comment below telling us what you think happens next. Morning arrives without mercy, announced by the clang of the iron bell that Master Langridge rings from the refinery entrance. Mercy startles awake on the storage room floor. her body screaming protest at every movement. The burn on her arm has wept fluid overnight, sticking her sleeve to the wound. When she peels the fabric away, fresh blood follows. The humidity is already oppressive, the air thick enough to chew. July in Delaware sits on the lungs like a drowning man sits on a riverbed. Patient, inevitable, fatal. Inside the refinery, the heat will be worse. It's always worse. She splashes her face with water from the bucket by the door, tepid, filmed with molasses residue, and joins the others filing into the rendering room. This is where the raw sugar cane is crushed, where the juice is extracted and separated, where the first transformation from plant to product begins. It's the heart of the refinery, and it's where Master Langridge spends most of his time because this is where the most damage can be done. To product and to people. Solomon Pritchard is already at his station by the great iron crusher, his missing fingers a testimony to years of service. He's perhaps 50, though he might be 30. Age is hard to read on faces worn down by labor and heat. He nods to Mercy but says nothing. Speaking without permission invites attention, and attention invites punishment. Young Bess arrives next, her eyes swollen from crying. She's maybe 15, small for her age, purchased 3 months ago from a plantation in Maryland. She still weeps most days, still believes there might be mercy somewhere in the world. Mercy envies and pities her in equal measure. Matthias Cole comes last, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who's learned that haste only leads to accidents. He's a large man, shoulders broad from labor, but his mouth is a ruin of scar tissue. His tongue was cut out years ago, punishment for talking back, Solomon once explained in whispers. Now Matthias speaks only through gestures and the eloquent silence of his eyes. These are her companions in suffering. These are the ones who work the rendering room while others tend the boiling vats, the cooling racks, the barrel room. They are not friends. Friendship is too dangerous, too costly when anyone might disappear into the machinery at any moment. But they are witnesses to each other's existence. And in this place that's almost sacred. Master Langridge enters through the main door, his boots striking the brick floor with proprietorial authority. He's wearing different clothes than last night. Fresh linen shirt, pressed trousers. But the same cruelty sits on his face like a second skin. His eyes find Mercy immediately, and she sees the promise there. The lesson hasn't been forgotten. Get to work, he says, his voice cutting through the mechanical groans of the building. That shipment's due by Thursday, and we're behind schedule. Anyone slows production, they'll work through the night. Again, the threat is directed at Mercy, and everyone knows it. The work begins. Solomon and Matthias feed raw cane stalks into the crusher, a monstrous contraption of iron rollers driven by a system of gears and chains powered by a great wheel outside, turned by a horse walking in endless circles. The cane stalks disappear between the rollers with screams that sound disturbingly organic, pulped and flattened, their juice running into collection troughs below. Mercy and young Bess work the troughs, skimming debris from the raw juice, transferring the liquid to copper pots for the first heating. The juice is cloudy green-brown, sticky, already sweet enough to attract flies. The flies are everywhere in the rendering room, black clouds of them feeding on spilled juice and exposed wounds with equal enthusiasm. The heat builds as the morning progresses. The furnaces beneath the copper pots roar, turning the rendering room into an approximation of hell. Sweat pours from every body, soaking through clothes, pooling on the floor where it mixes with spilled cane juice and makes every step treacherous. Master Langridge circles through the room like a shark, watching, calculating, finding fault. He kicks over a collection trough that Bess has just filled, sending gallons of cane juice across the floor. Contaminated, he says, though it's a lie. Do it again, and you'll work through lunch to make up the time. Bess starts to cry, quiet tears that run tracks through the grime on her face. Mercy wants to tell her to stop, that crying only makes it worse, but saying anything would be worse still. The crusher screams. Matthias feeds cane into its iron maw with mechanical precision, his hands coming within inches of the rollers with each stalk. One slip, one moment of inattention, and those hands would be pulled in, crushed, destroyed. Mercy has seen it happen, not here but at her previous placement before she was sold to Langridge. She remembers the sound it made, bone and meat compressed by inexorable force. She remembers how long the screaming lasted. "You there," Master Langridge says, and it takes Mercy a moment to realize he's speaking to her. "Come here." Her body obeys before her mind catches up, carrying her across the rendering room to where he stands by the largest copper pot. The juice inside is heating, beginning to bubble, steam rising in thick clouds. It's not yet molasses that takes hours of reduction, but it's hot enough to scald, to burn, to mark. Hold out your arm, he says. The burned one. This is the lesson, then. This is the promised punishment. Her arm throbs at the thought, the pipe burn from last night still fresh, still weeping. She extends her arm. What choice does she have? Master Langridge grabs her wrist, his fingers digging into the tendon hard enough to bruise. He positions her arm over the steam rising from the copper pot. The heat is immediate, intense, adding fresh agony to existing wounds. You need to understand something, he says conversationally, as if discussing the weather. You are property. Property doesn't think. Property doesn't have ideas. Property does what it's told, when it's told, how it's told. Do you understand? Yes, master, she says, and her voice is steady because somewhere in the night, surrounded by whispering molasses, something inside her shifted. The part of her that could be heard is receding, pulling back into some interior fortress where his cruelty can't quite reach. He holds her arm over the steam for a count of 30. The fresh burn overlaps with the pipe burn, skin blistering on top of blisters, and the pain is extraordinary. But she doesn't flinch, doesn't cry out. She watches the steam rise and thinks about temperatures, about boiling points, about how much heat is required to render flesh. When he finally releases her, there's frustration in his eyes. He wanted something from her, tears, pleading, acknowledgement of his power, and she's given him nothing. Get back to work, he snaps. She returns to the troughs, cradling her ruined arm, and young Bess stares at her with something like awe. Solomon shakes his head minutely, a warning or a prayer, she can't tell which. The morning grinds on. The heat becomes unbearable, then surpasses unbearable and enters some realm where the body simply stops protesting because protest requires energy that doesn't exist. Mercy works through it, skimming troughs, transferring juice, her burned arm screaming with every movement, but her face blank as the copper walls. At midday, when the sun is at its height and the rendering room has become an oven that bakes them all slowly, Master Langridge discovers that someone has been taking extra water rations. The dipper shows marks of unauthorized use. He lines them up, Solomon, Matthias, Bess, Mercy, and demands to know who the thief is. No one speaks. Mercy took the water to give to Bess, who was struggling in the heat, but admitting this would mean punishment for both of them. Fine, Master Langridge says. You'll all share the punishment. No water until evening, and you'll work an extra 2 hours tonight. Bess makes a small, desperate sound. She won't survive until evening without water, not in this heat. She's too small, too new, too breakable. Mercy opens her mouth to confess, to spare the others, but Solomon catches her eye and shakes his head. Don't, it won't help. It will only make things worse. The afternoon is a fever dream of heat and thirst and the mechanical screams of the crusher. Mercy's tongue swells in her mouth. Her vision hazes at the edges. The flies seem to multiply. They're buzzing, mixing with the groan of the gears until it sounds like voices, like the refinery itself is speaking in the language of machinery and suffering. It's during this haze, this delirium of heat and exhaustion, that Matthias has his accident. Or perhaps it's not an accident. Perhaps it's a choice. Perhaps after years of feeding Cain into the crusher's iron jaws, after years of silence and suffering, something in Matthias simply breaks. The way something broke in Mercy last night. And he decides he's done. He's feeding cane stalks with his usual precision when his hand slips or doesn't slip. When his hand deliberately moves too close and his sleeve catches in the rollers. Time stops. Mercy sees it happening in slow motion. The fabric pulled tight, Matthias's arm drawn toward the crusher, his eyes widening not with fear but with something that might be relief. Solomon lunges for him, trying to pull him back, but the machinery is stronger than any man. Matthias's arm enters the crusher up to the elbow. The sound is wet and terrible, bone splintering, meat compressing. He opens his mouth, that ruined mouth, but no scream emerges. Just a whistling gasp as pain drives the air from his lungs. Solomon is screaming for them to stop the crusher. But the wheel outside is turned by a horse, and the horse doesn't hear or doesn't care. The gears continue turning. Matthias's arm is pulled further in, his shoulder now, his torso, his body dragged inexorably toward the iron rollers. Master Langridge watches. Just watch. He has a pocket watch in his hand and he's timing it. Timing how long it takes for a man to be fed through the crusher, his face showing nothing but clinical interest. Mercy runs for the door. For the yard where the horse circles, but her legs won't move fast enough. Her body is too exhausted, too broken. By the time she reaches the yard and manages to stop the horse, silence has fallen in the rendering room. When she returns, Matthias is gone. Not dead, not collapsed, gone. Fed through the crusher completely. His body pulped and mixed with the cane juice that runs into the collection troughs. The juice is darker than usual, thick and red-tinged. Master Langridge returns his watch to his pocket. "Clean it up," he says. "That juice is contaminated. Dump it in the waste vat and start fresh." Solomon is trembling, his mouth working soundlessly. Young Bess has fallen to her knees, retching. Mercy stands in the doorway staring at the dark juice in the troughs and thinks, that was a person. That was Matthias Cole. Now he's a product, they don't stop working. They can't. The refinery doesn't permit grief, doesn't acknowledge loss. They dump the contaminated juice, Matthias's juice, into the waste vat behind the building, and they clean the crusher and they feed more cane, and production continues. That night, collapsed in her corner of the storage room, Mercy stares at her burned arm. The pain has become background noise, constant and meaningless. She thinks about Matthias choosing the crusher. She thinks about the whispering molasses. She thinks about boiling points. She whispers to the darkness, "How much heat does it take to render a man?" And from the vats, in a voice that might be steam or might be something else, "Only as much as he deserves." A week passes, though time in the refinery moves strangely, stretching and compressing like heated sugar. Days bleed into nights, shifts into each other, until Mercy can no longer remember if she's been here 6 months or 6 years. The refinery devours time the way it devours everything else. Matthias's absence is a wound that won't close. His station at the crusher stands empty now. Master Langridge hasn't bothered to replace him yet, forcing Solomon to work double shifts instead. The old man's remaining fingers are developing tremors from exhaustion, and Mercy knows it's only a matter of time before the crusher claims them too. The machinery is patient. The machinery is always hungry. The burn on her arm has festered. Infection spreads in visible red tendrils beneath her skin, and the wound weeps a fluid that's neither blood nor pus but something in between, something that smells sweet and rotten at once. She should be feverish, delirious, dying. Instead, she feels clearer than she has in months, as if the infection is burning away everything unnecessary, leaving only the essential core of her. On the 3rd day after Matthias's death, Master Langridge brings his nephew to tour the refinery. Theodore Langridge is perhaps 25, dressed in fine clothes that wilt immediately in the heat and humidity. He's come from Philadelphia, sent by the family to learn the business, though his face shows nothing but disgust as his uncle leads him through the rendering room. He covers his nose with a handkerchief, flinching at the screams of the crusher, the clouds of flies, the casual brutality of his uncle directing the enslaved workers. "It's a profitable operation," Cornelius Langridge is saying, gesturing to the copper vats, the barrels of finished molasses waiting for shipment. "The margins are excellent once you account for the initial investment in property." Property. That's what he calls them. Not people, not workers. Property. Theodore's eyes find Mercy where she's skimming debris from a collection trough. His gaze lingers on her face, travels down her body, and she recognizes that look. She's seen it before on other men. Men who believe their appetite gives them ownership. Men who mistake their desires for rights. "That one's defective," Cornelius says, noticing his nephew's attention. "Doesn't respond properly to discipline. But she works hard enough and she hasn't tried to run." Not yet. They move on and Mercy returns to her work. But she can feel Theodore's eyes on her throughout the day, watching, calculating, hungry. Evening comes. The others are dismissed to their quarters, but Mercy remains to finish cleaning the copper pots. This has become routine. Master Langridge finds reasons to keep her late, alone, vulnerable. Tonight, though, it's not the uncle who finds her in the storage room. Theodore Langridge appears in the doorway, lamplight casting his shadow long across the floor. He removed his jacket, loosened his collar. His hands are already sticky with molasses from where he's been touching the barrels, testing the product. "You're the one he disciplines most," Theodore says. Not a question. Mercy says nothing. Speech without permission invites attention. Attention invites punishment. He steps closer. The storage room is small, lined with barrels and copper implements, no windows, only one door. He closes that door behind him. My uncle is cruel, Theodore continues, as if this confession absolves him of something. I'm not like him. I can be kind. Do you understand? She understands perfectly. This is the prelude to a different kind of violence, one dressed in the language of mercy but wielding the same absolute power. Kindness in the mouths of men like Theodore Langridge is just cruelty with patience. He reaches for her, and she doesn't resist because resistance would mean worse things later. His hands are on her shoulders, her waist pulling her against him. His breath smells of the port wine he's been drinking with his uncle. His fingers leave sticky trails across her skin where molasses transfers from his hands to her body. You should be grateful, he whispers against her neck. I'm gentler than my uncle would be. Mercy looks over his shoulder at the barrels lined against the wall. She counts them. 63. The same number as the copper rivets on the largest vat. The same number of days since she arrived at the refinery. Numbers have meaning here, a kind of magic, a way to mark time and existence and suffering. She lets herself drift away while it happens, the way she's learned to do. Her body remains in the storage room, pinned against the wall by Theodore Langridge's weight, but her mind goes elsewhere. She watches dust motes in the lamplight. She catalogs the contents of the shelves, ladles, stirring paddles, copper measures, empty barrels. She thinks about boiling points and the physics of heat and how long it would take for skin to blister at 240 degrees Fahrenheit. When he's finished, Theodore steps back, adjusting his clothes. He looks at her with something that might be guilt or might be satisfaction. The two are often indistinguishable in men like him. Don't tell my uncle, he says. He wouldn't understand. But I can be good to you if you cooperate. I can make things easier. He leaves her there, sticky with molasses and violation, and returns to the main house where he and his uncle will drink more port and discuss profit margins. Mercy slides down the wall to sit on the floor. She stares at her hands, burned, scarred, marked with residue from the refinery and now from Theodore. She thinks about how many different ways men find to hurt women, how many different languages they use to justify it. She whispers to the darkness. 63. The barrels seem to whisper back. The next day, young Bess collapses. The lash wounds on her back, inflicted a week ago for spilling a bucket, have become infected. The edges are black with necrosis, and the smell, sweet rot beneath the sweetness of molasses, tells Mercy everything she needs to know. The infection has spread too far, too deep. Without proper medical care, Bess will die. Master Langridge refuses to call a doctor. Not worth the expense, he says. She's barely worth what I paid for her anyway. So Bess lies in the corner of the rendering room, alternating between fever dreams and lucid moments of agony. In her delirium, she talks to people who aren't there, her mother, her siblings, people from before. And sometimes she talks to the refinery itself. It knows our names, she whispers when Mercy brings her water that night. The sweetness knows. It remembers everyone who died here. It's been waiting so long and it's so hungry. Hush, Mercy says, but without conviction. She believes Bess. She's heard the whispers too. It wants him. Bess continues, her eyes rolling white. The master. It's been patient, but it's ready now. It's been preparing someone. Teaching someone. Is it you, Mercy? Are you the one it's teaching? Mercy has no answer to that, but she thinks about the whispers from the vats, the lessons she's learned about temperature and viscosity, and the ways heat transforms matter. She thinks about Theodore's hands on her body, leaving their sticky marks, and Cornelius's pipe burning her arm, and Matthias feeding through the crusher while Langridge timed his death. Bess dies that night, quietly, her fever finally consuming her. Master Langridge has her body removed without ceremony, disposed of somewhere, perhaps in the same pit where they dumped Matthias's contaminated remains. Another one gone, Solomon mutters, not looking at Mercy. How many more before... He doesn't finish the sentence. Before what? Before the refinery claims them all? Before something breaks? Before the machinery runs red with something other than cane juice? A new girl arrives the next day. She's younger than Bess was, perhaps 14, with wide eyes that still hold hope. Master Langridge names her Penny because he finds it amusing, like she's loose change, something small and worthless. Mercy watches Penny stumble through her first day, burning herself on the copper pots, crying at the heat and the flies and the casual violence. She sees herself 6 months ago in that girl, and something inside her crystallizes into a decision. She can survive by keeping her head down, by enduring, by watching others suffer and die while she persists. She can become like Solomon, broken but alive, counting days until the refinery finally claims her too, or she can become something else. That night, alone in the boiling room, Mercy stands before the largest vat. The molasses is at temperature, bubbling and hissing, releasing plumes of steam that coat her skin. She dips her hand into a cooler vat, lets the thick liquid coat her fingers. When she pulls her hand out, the molasses clings like black glass, like armor. She thinks, this is what protection looks like. She thinks, this is what justice looks like. She thinks, the refinery has been teaching me. The sweetness has been patient. But everything has a boiling point. The molasses whispers, soon, soon, sister, soon, and Mercy Blackwood, because that is her name. She's claimed it back from the darkness, whispers in return, yes, soon. The shadows on the walls reach toward her with too many arms, and she doesn't flinch. The refinery breathes around her, satisfied, hungry, waiting. Tomorrow, she thinks, or the day after. But soon, there's work to be done. If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe for more macabre tales. Leave a comment below telling us what you think happens next. August arrives like a fever that won't break. The heat wave settles over Delaware with suffocating weight, turning the refinery into something beyond hell, something for which there are no adequate words. The copper vats seem to shimmer in the superheated air, and the molasses bubbles with unusual violence, as if it too has reached some critical threshold. Even by refinery standards, the heat is unbearable. 2 horses have died from the work of turning the great wheel. The brick walls radiate stored heat through the night, offering no respite. The flies have multiplied to biblical proportions. They're buzzing a constant drone that sounds disturbingly like voices, like the refinery itself speaking in the language of insects and machinery. Master Cornelius Langridge is in a foul mood. A shipment has been delayed. The buyer in Boston questioning the quality of the last batch, the one contaminated by Matthias's death, though of course they don't know that. They just knew it tasted wrong, looked darker than usual, and left a strange aftertaste that customers complained about. Now Langridge is losing money, losing reputation, and he needs someone to blame. His eyes find Mercy at her station by the collection troughs. She's been working since before dawn, 18 hours now without rest, and her infected arm has begun to smell like the molasses itself. Sweet rot. Decay disguised as something pleasant. You, he says, and the word carries the weight of accumulated rage. Come here. Solomon's eyes flash a warning. Penny, the new girl, makes a small sound of fear. But Mercy rises and crosses the rendering room with steady steps, her body moving automatically while her mind catalogs details. The largest copper vat is in the boiling room, currently at full temperature. The long-handled ladle rests against its rim. Master Langridge is drunk. She can smell the whiskey from 6 feet away and can see the unsteadiness in his stance. Drunk men make mistakes. Drunk men are careless. Someone's been stealing water rations again, Langridge says, circling her like a predator. I know it's you. You think I don't notice? You think I don't see everything that happens in my refinery? It was her. She's been giving extra water to Penny, who's struggling in the heat just as Bess did. But Mercy says nothing, just stands with her eyes downcast, waiting. I promised you a lesson, Langridge continues. I've been too lenient. That's the problem. I let you get away with too much, and now you think you can defy me. He grabs her arm, the infected one, and his fingers dig into the swollen tissue. Pain explodes through her shoulder, her neck, but she doesn't cry out. She's moved beyond crying out. She's moved beyond fear. She's in that strange clear space where everything slows down, where every detail becomes crystalline and significant. Langridge drags her into the boiling room. Solomon starts to follow, but Langridge snarls at him to stay at his station. Penny is sobbing quietly. The crusher screams its mechanical hunger. The boiling room is empty except for the 6 copper vats. The furnace is roaring beneath them, the air so hot it sears the lungs with every breath. The largest vat, the one Mercy has been tending for months, bubbles and hisses, sending up plumes of steam that seem to reach for them with ghostly fingers. Open your mouth, Langridge orders, reaching for the long-handled ladle that rests against the vat's rim. This is it then, the lesson he promised. The same lesson he gave to the girl before her, Ruth Chambers, who disappeared into the machinery. He's going to pour boiling molasses down her throat until she learns respect, until she chokes, until she dies. Time stretches, becomes elastic. Mercy watches him dip the ladle into the vat, watches the dark liquid, darker than usual, almost black, as if the refinery has been concentrating all its suffering into this single batch, clinging to the copper in thick strands. Steam rises from the ladle in thick plumes. She can smell it, burnt sugar and something underneath. Something ancient and patient and hungry. The molasses whispers, "Now, now, sister." Now Langridge lifts the ladle, and the liquid drips from it in slow streams, each drop seeming to hang in the air for an impossible moment before falling. He's smiling, that cruel smile she's seen so many times, the smile of a man who believes his power is absolute and eternal. "Last chance to beg," he says. "I might show mercy if you beg pretty enough." Mercy. That word. Her name. The name her mother gave her, hoping it would protect her, hoping the world might show her some kindness. The word is a joke, a lie, a promise broken before it was even made. She doesn't beg. Langridge brings the ladle toward her face. The heat is extraordinary, even from a foot away. She can feel her skin beginning to tighten, to burn. He's going to do it. He's really going to do it. Mercy jerks her head aside at the last possible moment. The molasses splashes across her collarbone instead of into her mouth. The pain is instant, absolute, a white-hot lance that travels through every nerve. She screams, finally screams, and the sound echoes off the copper walls, amplified and distorted until it sounds like many voices screaming, like all the dead of the refinery screaming through her throat. Langridge laughs, delighted by her pain. There it is. There's the fear. But something has broken. Not in Mercy, that broke long ago. Something in the world itself, in the membrane between what is and what might be. Her hand closes around the stirring paddle leaning against the wall. The wood is hot, burned nearly black from months of use, and it feels right in her grip. It feels like an extension of her arm, like a weapon forged specifically for this moment. She swings. The paddle connects with Langridge's temple with a sound like a melon cracking. He stumbles, surprise and pain wiping the smile from his face. Blood runs down his cheek, mixing with sweat, and he releases the ladle. It clatters to the floor, spilling molasses in a spreading pool. "You," he starts to say, but Mercy is already swinging again. This time she catches him across the knee. Bone cracks. She hears it clearly over the roar of the furnaces, and Langridge falls, cursing, screaming for Solomon to stop her, to grab her, to hold her down. But Solomon doesn't come. Penny doesn't come. They're frozen in the rendering room, watching through the doorway, unable or unwilling to intervene. Mercy stands over Cornelius Langridge, and for the first time in 6 months she feels present in her body. Every nerve is alive. The burn on her collarbone throbs. Her infected arm screams. But she's here, fully here. More real than she's been since the day she was dragged through the refinery doors. Langridge is trying to stand, but his shattered knee won't support him. He's pulling himself backward, leaving a trail of blood and sweat across the molasses-slicked floor. There's fear in his eyes now. Real fear, the kind he's inflicted on others for years but never expected to feel himself. "You'll hang for this," he gasps. "They'll burn you alive." "No," Mercy says, and her voice is calm, clear, almost gentle. "You don't understand. I'm already dead. I died the day I arrived here. I died when Ruth Chambers died. I died when Matthias fed through the crusher. I died when young Bess rotted from infection. I died every day for 6 months. I'm just a ghost now. And ghosts can't be punished." She reaches for the ladle. Langridge's eyes go wide. He understands now, finally understands what's about to happen. He tries to crawl faster, but the floor is too slippery. His knee is shattered, and there's nowhere to go anyway. The boiling room has only one door, and Mercy stands between him and freedom. She dips the ladle into the largest vat. The molasses that clings to the copper is so dark it seems to absorb light, and seems to be made of condensed shadow. Steam rises in thick plumes. She can feel the heat from 2 feet away, can smell the burnt sweetness that's like flowers and rot and burning meat all combined. The refinery holds its breath. The furnaces seem quiet. Even the bubbling of the vats pauses, as if the building itself is waiting for this moment, has been waiting for months, for years, perhaps for its entire existence. Mercy lifts the ladle. Molasses run from it in thick streams, strands like spider silk, like the threads that bind the world together. She thinks about her mother giving her the name Mercy. She thinks about Matthias dying while Langridge timed it. She thinks about Bess weeping with infection. She thinks about Theodore's hands leaving their sticky marks. She thinks about Ruth Chambers disappearing into the machinery. She thinks, this is what justice tastes like. Then she pours. The molasses falls. It doesn't splash, not at this temperature, not at this viscosity. It flows like living darkness, like liquid night given form and weight. The first stream catches Cornelius Langridge's upturned face, and for a moment, one crystalline, eternal moment, nothing happens. Then the screaming begins. It's not a human sound. It's something primal, something that predates language. A noise pulled from the deepest part of the animal brain where terror lives. The molasses adheres to his skin like tar, like napalm at 240 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to render flesh, to melt fat, to turn a man into tallow. Mercy watches. This is important. She watches everything. She will not look away. This is her work, her creation, her terrible justice, and she will witness every second. Langridge's hands come up instinctively to claw at his face, but that just spreads the molasses further. His fingers sink into the bubbling liquid on his cheeks, and now his hands are burning too. Skin sloughing away from bone like wax from a candle. The molasses finds his eyes, his left eye first, then his right, and they boil in their sockets, bursting like overripe fruit. He's rolling now, thrashing on the floor, but the molasses-slicked brick offers no purchase. Each movement just distributes the burning liquid further across his body. His hair ignites, not from flame but from pure heat, filling the boiling room with the stench of burning keratin. His beard melts away, taking skin with it. Mercy pours another ladle. This one catches his chest, his neck. The molasses seeps through his shirt, fine linen, expensive, soaked through with sweat, and brands the fabric to his flesh. She can see the skin bubbling beneath the cloth, can see blisters forming and bursting in rapid succession. The fat underneath begins to render, creating a slick that mixes with the molasses, and Langridge slides through his own liquefying tissue. The screaming has changed pitch now, gone higher, wetter. His throat is blistering, his vocal cords cooking, and the sound that emerges is more whistle than scream, air forcing itself through a passage that's collapsing. Sealing shut, Solomon appears in the doorway. His face is gray, his mouth working soundlessly. He takes one look at the scene, at Mercy standing over Langridge with the ladle, at the master writhing in his shell of black sweetness, and turns away. Not to get help. Not to stop her. Just to not see. Mercy understands. There are some things that can't be unseen. Some images that brand themselves onto the mind the way molasses brands flesh. Solomon is protecting himself the only way he can, through deliberate blindness. Another ladle. This one she pours slowly, deliberately, starting at Langridge's feet and working upward. His boots smoke, the leather crackling and splitting. His trousers begin to smolder. The molasses pools in the hollow of his stomach, eating through fabric and skin and muscle, exposing the white curve of rib beneath. He's still alive. Impossibly, horrifically, he's still alive. His body is in shock, systems shutting down one by one, but his heart keeps beating. His lungs keep trying to pull air through a throat that's closing, and his brain keeps processing pain even as it begins to cook inside his skull. Mercy thinks Matthias took 3 minutes to die in the crusher. Master Langridge timed it. She wonders how long this will take. She wonders if she should time it. The thought almost makes her laugh, a sound that would come out wrong, broken, inhuman. So she swallows it and pours another ladle instead. This one catches his groin, his thighs. She doesn't aim there deliberately. There's no cruelty in her actions, no sadism. This isn't revenge in the way Theodore or Cornelius would understand it, performed with pleasure or satisfaction. This is simply necessary. This is the work that must be done. The refinery has been teaching her, preparing her, and now she's fulfilling her purpose. The molasses has begun to cool and harden on contact with the air, creating a black carapace over Langridge's body. It cracks when he moves, and he's still moving, still trying to crawl, some animal part of him refusing to accept death, revealing raw red meat beneath. The contrast is striking. Glossy black shell, wet crimson interior like some terrible insect emerging from a chrysalis. Footsteps thunder outside. Voices shouting. Theodore Langridge has heard the screaming, has come running from the main house. Mercy can hear him in the yard calling for his uncle. and she knows she has perhaps 30 seconds before he reaches the boiling room. She pours faster now, ladle after ladle, working with the efficiency she's learned from 6 months of constant labor. The molasses flows over Langridge's head, his torso, his limbs, coating him entirely. Steam rises in thick plumes, and the smell, burnt sugar and rendered fat and something else, something that might be the smell of a soul departing, fills the room. Theodore bursts through the door. He stops, stares. His face goes from confusion to horror, to something beyond horror, some expression for which there are no words. He sees his uncle on the floor. What remains of his uncle, this thing that was once human and is now something else, something rendered and transformed. He sees Mercy standing over the body with the ladle still in her hand, molasses dripping from the copper in slow, thick streams. "You," Theodore breathes. "You did this." Mercy meets his eyes. She thinks about the storage room, about his hands on her body, about his whispered promise to be kind. She thinks about how many words men have for the violence they inflict, how many ways they justify and rationalize and excuse. "Yes," she says simply. Theodore doesn't try to stop her. He doesn't rush to his uncle's aid. There's no aid to give now. Cornelius Langridge is beyond any earthly help. Instead, Theodore turns and runs. His footsteps echo through the refinery, growing fainter, and she knows he's running for the authorities, for the sheriff, for anyone who might restore order to a world that has suddenly inverted itself. Mercy sets down the ladle. Her arms are shaking from exhaustion or adrenaline or the simple mechanical strain of lifting and pouring. She looks at her hands. They're covered in molasses, the skin sticky and dark, and for a moment she can't tell where her flesh ends and the sweetness begins. On the floor, Cornelius Langridge finally stops moving. The terrible whistling breath ceases. The body, because it's just a body now, meat and bone and rendered fat, all humanity boiled away, lies still inside its black shell. Mercy thinks about Ruth Chambers, about Matthias Cole, about young Bess and all the others whose names she never learned, who disappeared into the refinery's hunger. She thinks about Penny in the other room, who will live another day because of this, who might survive long enough for the world to change, for this horror to end. She thinks, is it enough? The molasses whispers it will never be enough, but it's a beginning. Solomon appears in the doorway again, his face still gray, but his eyes are clear. "They're coming," he says quietly. "The law. They'll hang you for this, I know," Mercy says. "Was it worth it?" She looks at the body, at the black shell that was once her torturer. She thinks about the moment the molasses fell, about watching his eyes boil, about the satisfying crack of the paddle against his skull. She thinks about 6 months of burns and starvation and casual cruelty, about being reduced to property, to a thing without name or personhood. "Yes," she says, and means it. The sound of horses reaches them, the sheriff and his men, summoned by Theodore, coming to restore order and capture the slave who murdered her master. Coming to make an example of her, to hang her or burn her or tear her apart, to demonstrate what happens when property forgets its place. But Mercy Blackwood stands in the boiling room surrounded by copper vats, coated in molasses and blood and the residue of her vengeance, and she feels no fear. Fear requires a future to fear. Fear requires believing that things could be worse. And she died 6 months ago in this refinery. Everything since has just been a ghost learning to haunt. She looks at the largest vat, still bubbling, still hot. She could step into it now, end things on her own terms before they take her. The molasses whispers its invitation, promising rest, promising sweetness, promising an end to pain. But she doesn't step forward. Not yet. She's curious to see what happens next. Curious to see if they'll execute her publicly, if her death will mean something, if other enslaved people will hear about the slave girl who poured boiling molasses on the master's face and maybe, just maybe, find some small ember of hope in that darkness. Or maybe her death will mean nothing at all. Maybe it will be just another death in an endless procession of deaths, rendered down and forgotten, sweetness extracted and sold while the bitter residue is discarded. Either way, Cornelius Langridge is dead. And she did that. She, Mercy Blackwood, property and ghost and instrument of the refinery's long hunger, killed him. That fact exists now in the world, immutable as physics, permanent as the scars on her arms. The refinery breathes around her, satisfied at last. The shadows on the walls settle into their proper shapes. The whispers from the vats quiet to something like contentment. Outside, the horses arrive. Men's voices shout orders. The door to the refinery crashes open. Mercy stands in the center of the boiling room, her arms at her sides, molasses cooling on her skin like armor. Like proof, like a testament, she closes her eyes and waits for whatever comes next. If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe for more macabre tales. Leave a comment below telling us what you think happens next. They don't hang her. This surprises everyone, most of all Mercy herself. She spends 3 days in the Wilmington jail, sitting in darkness that feels almost cool compared to the refinery, waiting for the rope or the fire or whatever end men have decided she deserves. But on the 4th day, Theodore Langridge comes to see her. He stands outside her cell, unable to meet her eyes. His hands are shaking and he smells of whiskey, the same cheap corn whiskey his uncle favored. He's trying to become the man he watched die, trying to fill boots that are too big and too cruel for him. They want to know what happened, he says finally. The sheriff, the magistrate. They're asking questions. Mercy says nothing. She's learned the power of silence, the way it forces others to fill the void with their own guilt. I told them, Theodore continues, his voice barely above a whisper, that it was an accident, that my uncle slipped on the molasses-slicked floor, that he fell into the vat trying to catch himself. Mercy tilts her head, studying him. Why? Theodore finally looks at her and she sees it in his eyes. Not kindness, not mercy, but fear. He's terrified that if she speaks, if she tells the truth about what happened in that storage room, about his hands on her body, about the systematic brutality of the refinery, someone might start asking uncomfortable questions. Someone might wonder what kind of place drives a person to murder. The other slaves corroborated the story, he says. Solomon, the girl Penny. They said it was an accident, of course they did. Solomon knows the alternative, a public execution that would be used to terrorize every enslaved person in Delaware, a spectacle of violence meant to remind them of their place. Better to let the master's death be an accident, a warning about unsafe working conditions, something that doesn't require blood payment. I'm selling the refinery, Theodore says, and everyone in it. You'll be sent south, Georgia probably, to a plantation. It's better than hanging, better. That word again. The word men use when they mean less immediately fatal, but not actually good, not actually merciful. You'll be gone by week's end, Theodore continues. And this, all of this, it'll be forgotten. An accident, nothing more. He leaves without waiting for her response. What response could she give? Thank you for not executing me for murdering your uncle in self-defense. Thank you for selling me further into bondage rather than killing me outright. The refinery has taught her that gratitude is a luxury reserved for those who have choices. The journey south is a blur of heat and shackles and slave coffles. Human beings chained together and march like cattle. Mercy walks through it in that same dissociative state she perfected in the refinery, watching her body move while her mind drifts elsewhere. She's sold at an auction in Savannah, purchased by a man named Augustus Pemberton, who needs field hands for his cotton plantation outside Atlanta. The work is brutal, 12-hour days under the Georgia sun, picking cotton until her fingers bleed, her back screaming. But it's different from the refinery. There's sky here, wind, the smell of growing things instead of burning sugar. She never speaks of what happened in Wilmington. The story travels anyway, the way stories do among enslaved people, whispered in quarters at night, passed from plantation to plantation, changing and growing with each telling. The slave girl who poured boiling molasses on the master's face. Some versions say she was hanged. Some say she escaped north. Some say she transformed into a spirit of vengeance, haunting refineries and sugar plantations, protecting the enslaved from their master's cruelty. Mercy hears these stories and says nothing. Let them believe what they need to believe. She's just a woman working cotton now. Another body in an infinite procession of bodies, rendered down by a different kind of machinery, but rendered nonetheless. But she dreams of the refinery every night. In her dreams, the copper vats still bubble. The molasses still whispers. And Cornelius Langridge is still dying, over and over, his screams echoing off brick walls for eternity. Sometimes Ruth Chambers is there, and Matthias Cole and young Bess, all of them watching with satisfied eyes as the master burns. Sometimes the refinery itself speaks to her, in a voice made of steam and grinding gears and the accumulated suffering of everyone who died within its walls. It tells her that some buildings remember. Some places hold on to violence so tightly that they become violence, transformed by what they've witnessed into something neither living nor dead but eternally hungry. We are not finished, the refinery says in her dreams. There is more work to be done, more rendering, more justice. And Mercy wakes with the smell of burnt sugar in her nostrils, the taste of sweetness on her tongue, and molasses under her fingernails that wasn't there when she fell asleep. Years pass. The world changes slowly, then all at once. War comes to America. Brother fighting brother, the Union against the Confederacy, and underneath it all the question of what it means to own another human being. Mercy works through it, surviving battles that rage around the plantation, surviving Sherman's march, surviving the chaos of newly proclaimed freedom that comes without land, without money, without any infrastructure to support it. She survives because surviving is what she does. It's what the refinery taught her. By 1872, Mercy Blackwood was an old woman living in a colored community outside Atlanta. She works as a midwife and healer, using knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother, mixed with things she learned in darker places, harder ways. The young people are frightened of her. She never smiles, never softens, carries herself with the rigid posture of someone who learned long ago that vulnerability is death. But mothers trust her because she's never lost a baby, because her hands are steady even when dealing with breech births, with hemorrhaging, with all the ways childbirth tries to kill women, because she understands pain intimately and knows how to guide others through it. One night in August, always August, the month when heat becomes unbearable and everything reaches its boiling point, a young woman comes to her door. She's in labor, frightened, having run from a situation Mercy doesn't need explained. Some things are universal, transcending time and place and the formal end of slavery. Mercy brings her inside, prepares her herbs and clean clothes, talks her through the contractions with the same steady calm she used to stir molasses. The birth is difficult but successful. A girl, healthy lungs, strong cry, all fingers and toes accounted for. The mother weeps with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she says. "Thank you. I thought I might die. I thought she might die." "You're both fine," Mercy says, washing her hands in the basin. "You're stronger than you know." As she washes, she catches her reflection in the water. For a moment, just a moment, the lamplight makes the water look dark and viscous. Molasses. She smells burning sugar, hears the distant scream of machinery, feels the weight of the paddle in her hands. She blinks, and it's just water again, clear, clean, innocent. But her hands remember. The scars on her arms remember. The burns from Cornelius Langridge's pipe, overlaid with decades of other scars, other labors, other survivals. The burn on her collarbone where molasses splashed before she fought back is still visible. A dark patch of twisted skin that never quite healed right. She touches it absently, and the sensation is strange. No pain, just a distant warmth, as if the flesh there operates at a different temperature than the rest of her body. "Ma'am," the young mother says. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Mercy says. "Just remembering." She sits in her chair while the mother nurses the baby, and she thinks about copper vats and boiling points and the moment everything changed. She thinks about the Langridge Refinery, wonders if it's still standing, still processing sugar, still hungry. She hasn't heard news from Delaware in decades. The refinery could have burned down, could have been sold and renovated, could have been demolished and replaced with something modern and efficient, or it could still be there, exactly as she left it, waiting. In 1847, the refinery had burned. She learned this years later. The story passed through the network of freed people sharing news and histories. The fire started in the boiling room for no clear reason anyone could determine. It burned so hot that the copper vats melted, the brick walls cracked, and the smell of burning sugar hung over Wilmington for days, making people sick, giving them nightmares of screaming and sweetness. No one died in the fire. The building was empty when it started. But afterward, no one would work on that site. No one would rebuild. The land sat empty, toxic with old molasses that had soaked into the soil, making nothing grow. Eventually, the city declared it contaminated and left it abandoned. Mercy likes to think the refinery burned itself down, likes to think that once it had tasted the justice it craved, once it had facilitated her vengeance, It decided its work was complete. Or maybe it's still there somehow in whatever realm buildings go when they die, still bubbling, still whispering names, still waiting for the next person who needs its particular brand of education. The baby fusses and the mother adjusts her hold. "What will happen to us?" she asked quietly. "Where do we go from here?" Mercy looks at her. This young woman, this child with a child, running from something and toward something else, trying to build a life in a world that's barely more merciful than the one Mercy was born into. Freedom has come technically, legally, but freedom without resources is just a different kind of trap. "You survive," Mercy says. "You wake up tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. You protect your daughter. You teach her to be strong. You teach her that some things are worth fighting for even when fighting costs everything." "And if the fighting doesn't change anything?" the young woman asks. "If the world stays cruel?" Mercy thinks about Cornelius Langridge screaming in his shell of molasses. She thinks about how his death didn't end slavery, didn't reform the refinery system, didn't save Ruth Chambers or Matthias Cole or young Bess. She thinks about how individual acts of violence, no matter how justified, rarely change the larger systems of violence that birthed them. But she also thinks about Penny, who survived because of what she did, about Solomon, who witnessed that a master could die, that they weren't invincible gods but just men, fragile and mortal, about all the enslaved people who heard the story and maybe, just maybe, felt a small spark of hope or power or the understanding that resistance was possible. "The world stays cruel," Mercy admits, "but you don't have to stay small. You don't have to let cruelty win. Even if all you do is survive, that's victory. Every day you live, every day you protect your daughter, every day you refuse to break completely, that's winning." The young woman nods, though Mercy can see she doesn't fully believe it yet. That's fine. Belief comes later, after enough days of survival, after enough small victories accumulate into something larger. Mercy stands, her joints protesting. She's old now, truly old, and her body carries decades of damage that no amount of survival can erase. But she's here. She's alive, and somewhere in Delaware there's an empty lot where a refinery used to stand, where the soil is still toxic with sweetness, where nothing grows. She hopes nothing ever grows there. She hopes that the ground stays poisoned, stays empty, stays as a scar on the landscape that reminds people something terrible happened here. Someone suffered here, someone fought back here, and someone won, not the war, not the revolution, not the transformation of systems, but one battle, one moment, one act of terrible necessary violence that said, "I am not property. I am not nothing. I am Mercy Blackwood, and I will not die quietly." She walks the young woman to the door as dawn breaks over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that look disturbingly like burning sugar. The baby sleeps in her mother's arms, innocent of the world's cruelty, at least for now. "Thank you," the mother says again, "for everything." "No thanks necessary," Mercy says. "Just remember, some sweetness never washes away." The young woman looks confused by this statement, but she nods and leaves. Walking into the morning light with her daughter, Mercy stands in her doorway watching them go. Her hands hang at her sides, scarred, burned, marked forever by that night in 1832. She touches the burn on her collarbone one more time, and for just a moment she swears she can feel heat radiating from it, as if somewhere in some other world the refinery is still burning. She whispers to the dawn. Some wounds become armor, and from somewhere distant, carried on wind that smells faintly of burnt sugar, comes an answer that might be echo or memory or the refinery itself, speaking across time and distance. Some justice never cools. Mercy Blackwood smiles, the first real smile in 40 years, and goes back inside to clean up. There will be other births tonight, other women needing help, other babies entering this cruel and beautiful world, and she'll be there for them, steady and strong and unbreakable, her hands forever marked by the night she poured boiling molasses on the master's face, the night she became something more than property, the night she became a legend, the night the sweetness finally had its revenge. If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe for more macabre tales. Leave a comment below telling us what you think happens next.